Eli stood in the dimly lit workshop, her gaze fixed on the 3 peculiar eggs. They lay nestled in a tray lined with mystical symbols, each as large as a football and covered in a shell that shimmered faintly under the light. She adjusted the lens of her technomancer's visor, studying the faint aura that clung to them like a shadowy mist. She hadn't noticed it at first, but now, as she traced the contours of the eggs with her gloved fingers, the familiarity struck her. The energy was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. She'd encountered it before, back at the Shadow Realm bar, amid the swirling energies of that otherworldly place. Eli felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped back, taking in the sight before her. "Gunnar needs to see this," she murmured, carefully removing her visor and setting it on the table. Eli found Gunnar in his office, leaning over a map strewn with tactical markers. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single lamp, casting long shadows over the walls. He looked up as she entered, his sharp blue eye locking onto her with an intensity that never seemed to waver. "Got something?" he asked, straightening. "Yeah. I think I know where those eggs came from." She crossed the room, placing a data tablet on his desk and bringing up the analysis. "It's the aura. I've felt it before, when we were at the Shadow Realm bar." Gunnar's eye narrowed as he looked over the information. "You're saying these were traded there?" Eli nodded. "I can't be certain, but it's a strong lead. That place is a black market hotspot for supernatural items, and this aura has the same resonance as some of the stuff we encountered in the bar. I think it's possible that someone moved these eggs through there recently." He let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "That means we're dealing with inter-realm trafficking. If these eggs crossed from one realm to ours, whoever handled them has more power than we're prepared to face." "I thought as much. That's why I came to you. We need more intel. And fast." Gunnar nodded, already reaching for the secure line to contact Sophia. The thought of trafficking from sealed realms didn't sit well with him, and if the Shadow Realm bar was involved, they'd need someone on the inside. He dialed Sophia, his fingers moving swiftly over the keypad. "Sophia, it's Gunnar. We've got a situation," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "Eli's traced the origin of some items to the Shadow Realm bar. I need you to reach out to Shade. Can he meet us tonight?" Sophia's voice crackled through the speaker, calm and composed. "Understood. Shade's mentioned unusual activity there lately. He's been hearing about some risky trades. I'll set up a meeting, but fair warning, Shade knows about you. He's heard the stories." Gunnar raised an eyebrow. "Let's hope that works in our favor. Meet us near the bar in an hour." The alley near the Shadow Realm bar was cloaked in darkness, the shadows pooling thick around the damp brick walls. Eli and Gunnar stood with Sophia, their breath visible in the cold night air. A figure detached itself from the darkness, approaching them with hesitant steps. Shade's face was half hidden beneath the hood of his cloak, but his eyes, wide and wary, betrayed his nerves. Shade halted a few feet away, casting a quick glance at Sophia before focusing on Gunnar. "So, you're the one they call Gunnar," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Demon King's slayer." Gunnar gave a small nod, crossing his arms. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "That's right." Shade swallowed hard, his eyes darting back to Eli, as if for reassurance, before looking at Gunnar again. "I didn't expect to meet you in person. They say you took down Ultranacious single-handedly. The stories, well, let's just say they're legendary." "Stories tend to get exaggerated," Gunnar replied, his voice even. "But we're not here to talk about the past. We need information." Shade nodded quickly, tugging his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "Right, of course. You mentioned some eggs?" Gunnar gestured for Eli to explain. She stepped forward, her tone calm and reassuring as she described the aura she'd detected and her suspicion that the eggs had been traded at the bar. Shade listened intently, but his gaze kept flickering back to Gunnar, a mix of awe and unease in his expression. "So, these eggs," Shade said, trying to sound casual, though his voice shook slightly. "Yeah, I've heard some things. They were part of a recent transaction. Big money involved, from what I gathered. I don't know who the buyer is, but they're not your average bar patron. They're someone with enough pull to move things from the sealed realms." Gunner's expression hardened. "Who do you think it could be?" Shade hesitated, his eyes flitting between Gunner and the alley's exit, as if contemplating his escape, but he squared his shoulders, steeling himself. "I'm not sure, but if they're dealing in creatures from sealed realms, then you're dealing with someone who doesn't care about boundaries. Black Dawn, maybe. Or worse." Eli's gaze sharpened. "Worse than Black Dawn?" Shade nodded, his face pale in the faint light. "There are factions out there that make Black Dawn look like amateurs. I've heard rumors of groups that want to breach the seals completely, flood our world with creatures that should never leave their realms. If that's who you're dealing with, then this is bigger than any of us." Gunner stepped forward, and Shade instinctively took a step back. "We'll need more than rumors, Shade. Find out who's behind this and what they want. I don't care what it takes." Shade swallowed, nodding rapidly. "Understood. I'll keep my ear to the ground. And, if you don't mind, I'll be keeping out of your way." Gunner's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good choice. Now, get to it." Shade shot one last glance at Sophia, then disappeared back into the shadows, his movements quick and silent. As his footsteps faded away, Gunner looked to Eli and Sophia, his expression grim. "This is just the beginning," he said, his tone heavy with resolve. "Let's find out what's coming and make sure we're ready for it." Gunner stood in the center of the briefing room, arms crossed, his gaze shifting between Eli and Karina. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery in the background. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. The mission was too important for that. "We've got intel that those eggs likely passed through the Shadow Realm bar," he began, his voice steady but intense. "It's not just some casual black market trade. Whoever moved those eggs is dealing in things from sealed realms, which means they have connections and power." Eli nodded, listening closely while Karina remained silent, her gaze focused and unwavering. "I'm sending you two in," Gunner continued, meeting Karina's eyes. "This isn't a routine intel-gathering mission. The stakes are high, and I want our best fighter there in case things get messy." He glanced at Eli, his tone softening slightly. "Eli's familiarity with the bar will give us an edge. Between the two of you, I'm confident we'll get what we need." Karina's hand drifted to the hilt of her katana, a familiar gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Gunner. "Understood," she replied, her tone as steady as his. Eli smirked, breaking the tension. "You're sending us into a den of shady dealers and supernatural creatures. Sounds like my kind of party." Gunner's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "Keep your wits about you. Shade gave us what he could, but if those eggs came from there, someone at that bar knows more. And remember, we can't afford to make enemies out of everyone. Keep things civil if you can." Karina gave a short nod, though her hand remained on the hilt of her katana, as if grounding herself for what lay ahead. "We'll get the answers," she said, her voice carrying an edge of resolve. Gunner took a step back, surveying them both. "Good. Move out. And, Karina," he added, his tone taking on a note of warning, "try not to cause too much trouble. I'd like to avoid a repeat of the last time we had to deal with bouncers." Eli chuckled, nudging Karina. "See, even the boss knows your trouble. Let's try to keep it low-key. For once." Karina smirked, giving Eli a look that spoke volumes. "No promises," she replied, a spark of mischief in her eyes. Gunner shook his head but said nothing more. As they turned to leave, his voice cut through the air one last time. "Be careful out there, and bring back something we can use." With that, Eli and Karina exited the room, ready to step into the shadows and uncover whatever secrets the Shadow Realm bar held. The dive bar's neon sign flickered weakly as Eli and Karina stepped through the entrance, leaving the street behind. As they stepped into the dimly lit bar, their eyes adjusted to the smoky haze and the low hum of conversation. Humans and supernatural beings in human form mingled seamlessly, their interactions punctuated by the clinking of glasses and murmured exchanges. Eli glanced around, scanning the room for any familiar faces. It didn't take long before her gaze settled on Rose, lounging at a corner table with an air of casual confidence. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the light, a bracelet that Eli knew well. It was the magic-dampening bracelet that Gunnar and Ashley had put on her, a reminder of the encounter that had left Rose with a taste of Echo Division's control. Rose spotted Eli and raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Well, well," she drawled, her voice smooth and teasing. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Where's Darren? I've been missing our little talks." Eli returned the smirk, her voice laced with mock cheerfulness. "He's at home with the kids, enjoying a quiet night. It's girls' night out for us." Karina stifled a laugh as they continued past Rose's table, but Rose wasn't finished. She leaned forward, the bracelet on her wrist glinting ominously as she toyed with it. "You know, this little trinket is really cramping my style," she said, her tone both bitter and wistful. "Pass my regards along to your leader. I'll be waiting for the day we settle this." Eli shot her a calm smile. "I'll let him know. But don't get too attached to that bracelet, it suits you." With that, they moved deeper into the bar, leaving Rose's gaze trailing after them. Karina's curiosity was piqued, and she glanced at Eli as they approached the doorway to the Shadow Realm. "She doesn't seem like the kind to let a grudge go," Karina remarked, eyeing the bouncer ahead. "No, she's not," Eli replied, "but as long as that bracelet stays on, she's more bark than bite." They stepped through the doorway and the bouncer gave them a scrutinizing look, holding out his hand for their weapons. The doorway into the Shadow Realm loomed before them, guarded by a hulking bouncer who barely fit into the cramped hallway. He stood at least 7 feet tall, his skin rough like stone and his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Eli felt Karina tense beside her, a subtle shift, but one she'd come to recognize as a sign of brewing trouble. As they stepped closer, the bouncer extended one massive hand, his palm open in silent demand. Eli handed over her small enchanted dagger without a second thought. Aware that they were on borrowed hospitality, she turned to see Karina still clutching her katana, her knuckles white as her fingers tightened around the hilt. The bouncer's eyes narrowed, and the air around them seemed to thicken. Karina's gaze met his, unflinching, her expression hard as steel. It wasn't hard to see that she had no intention of handing over her weapon. "Karina," Eli murmured, trying to catch her attention, but Karina's focus was locked on the bouncer. The bouncer let out a low growl, his arm muscles tensing as he took a step forward. Eli could almost hear the unspoken challenge crackling between them. She'd seen that look in Karina's eyes before, the look that said she'd rather take on a beast twice her size than give up her weapon. Eli braced herself, wondering if they were about to be ejected from the bar before even setting foot inside. But she knew better than to let things escalate. Taking a step forward, Eli put a hand on Karina's shoulder, a casual gesture that belied her own readiness for a fight. "Come on, Karina," she said, her tone light and dripping with sarcasm. "It's not worth it. Besides, you've got that look in your eye, and I'm really not in the mood to bail you out tonight." Karina's gaze flicked to Eli, a hint of annoyance flashing across her face. "He's not getting my katana." Eli chuckled, dropping her voice to a playful whisper. "I get it. You've got attachment issues. But trust me, this guy doesn't look like he's going to budge. I'd hate to see what he'd do to that pretty face of yours." She turned her attention back to the bouncer, giving him an appraising look. "She's stubborn as hell, you know. Must be a fighter thing." The bouncer's expression softened just a fraction, and he grunted, clearly unamused but seeming less hostile. Karina still looked ready to bolt, her eyes darting between Eli and the bouncer as though calculating her odds. Eli took a step closer to the bouncer, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Between you and me," she said conspiratorially, "she's just warming up. I don't think you want to see her get serious. The bouncer's lips twisted into what might have been a smile, at least as much of a smile as a creature of his size and stony demeanor could muster. He extended his hand again, more insistently this time. Eli gave Karina a gentle nudge, her tone softer now. Come on, Karina, you'll get it back. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. After a tense moment, Karina finally relented, letting out a resigned sigh. She unfastened the katana from her belt and handed it over, but not without a long, hard stare at the bouncer. You better take care of it, she warned, her voice low and dangerous. The bouncer accepted the weapon with a grunt, his eyes never leaving Karina's. He turned and placed the katana on a nearby rack, handling it with surprising care. Karina watched him like a hawk, her body coiled as if ready to spring at the slightest sign of disrespect to her blade. Eli gave a small sigh of relief, flashing Karina a grin. See? That wasn't so bad, she teased, her voice tinged with the dry wit she'd picked up from Darren. And look, you didn't even have to break a sweat. Karina shot her a look, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Don't get used to it. They continued down the hall, the air around them cooling as they approached the heart of the shadow realm. The bar's true nature unfolded before them, revealing creatures in their full supernatural forms, their appearances shifting under the dim light like flickers of shadow and flame. Eli could feel the tension rolling off Karina in waves, but she knew her friend's unease went deeper than just handing over a weapon. In this world of shifting shadows and hidden threats, Karina's every instinct was on high alert, and as they moved further into the depths of the shadow realm, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them from the darkness. Eli and Karina moved deeper into the Shadow Realm bar, navigating through a crowd of beings in their true forms who spoke in hushed voices and cast curious glances their way. They passed tables cluttered with relics and potions, and the air was thick with the scent of sulphur and something sweetly metallic. At the far end of the room, an old trader sat surrounded by peculiar artifacts. His eyes, shadowed beneath a heavy hood, glinted as they approached. Eli gave Karina a nod, and they made their way over, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. The trader looked up, his gaze flickering from Eli to Karina. His eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, a flash of recognition crossing his face. Karina stiffened, feeling a strange prickle of familiarity, though she couldn't place where she'd seen him before. Evening, Eli said, her tone casual as she scanned the items spread out on the table. We're here about some eggs that recently changed hands, 3 to be specific, from a sealed realm. She kept her voice steady, but Karina could sense the tension beneath it. The trader's expression barely changed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, one that told her Eli was onto something. He inclined his head, his voice gravelly and low. Can't say I know what you're talking about, he replied, his gaze sliding back to Karina. I deal in a lot of things, but eggs aren't my specialty. Karina felt a jolt as his eyes met hers again, and for a moment, the world shifted. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, and she was back in that dim room from her childhood. The scent of incense filled her nostrils, and she saw the shadowy figure reach out, felt the rush of power and the eerie sense of familiarity that threatened to overwhelm her. She snapped back to the present, her heart racing. The trader was still watching her, a knowing glint in his eyes. Eli's voice cut through her disorientation, steady and unyielding. Funny, because I picked up on your signature near those eggs, she said, her eyes narrowing. You're not the only one who can sense auras. The trader's mouth twisted into a thin smile. Ah, I see. The technomancer has been busy, he said, his gaze flicking to Eli. Fine, yes, I may have had a hand in their distribution, but their origins are none of your concern. Eli leaned forward, crossing her arms over her chest. Actually, it is our concern. Those eggs pose a threat, and you know it. Who did you sell them to? The trader shrugged, his demeanor unbothered. I sell to those who pay. It's not my job to ask questions. But his eyes darted back to Karina, and she felt the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air, as if there was something he wanted to say but didn't dare. Karina's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her pulse pounding. "And yet, you seem awfully interested in me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The trader's smile faded, and he straightened, finally breaking his silence. "Because you remind me of someone," he murmured, his tone almost regretful. "Someone who walked a similar path once. You carry shadows in you, girl. Shadows that can't be hidden, no matter how hard you try." Eli stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "Enough with the cryptic nonsense. Tell us what you know about those eggs. Who did you sell them to?" The trader's gaze lingered on Karina a moment longer before shifting to Eli. "They were destined for hands that could pay the price," he said, a dark smile curving his lips. "But if you're looking to play hero, you're already too late. The buyer has already moved them on. I was just a middleman." "Who's the buyer?" Eli demanded, her voice ice cold. The trader chuckled, a hollow sound that sent a chill down Karina's spine. "Names have power, and that is a power I am not inclined to share. But I will say this. Whoever bought those eggs knows more about what lies within them than you or I could ever understand." The answer wasn't what they wanted, but it was something. Eli gave him a final hard stare, then motioned for Karina to follow her. They walked away, leaving the trader in his shadowy corner. But Karina couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen him somewhere before, or perhaps in another life. As they moved back toward the main area of the bar, Karina felt Eli's gaze on her. "You okay?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Karina swallowed, trying to clear the lingering sense of unease. "Fine. Just memories." She hesitated, then added, "He recognized me. I don't know how, but he did." Eli nodded, not pressing further. "Let's get out of here," she said, leading the way back to the door. "We've got enough to report to Gunner, and we need to figure out our next move." As they left the bar, Karina cast one last glance over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the trader watching her from the shadows. She knew deep down that he held answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask yet. And somehow she knew that this wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. As Eli and Karina made their way back to the entrance of the Shadow Realm, the familiar hulking bouncer awaited them, arms crossed, his gaze cold and impassive. Beside him was the weapons rack, where Karina's katana rested, untouched, but carefully watched over. Karina stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she reached for it. The bouncer held it out, and Karina took it with a steady hand, her fingers instinctively wrapping around the hilt. She turned the blade slightly, inspecting it for any signs of disturbance. Satisfied, she slid the katana back into its sheath with a fluid motion, her shoulders relaxing as the familiar weight settled at her side. Eli chuckled softly. "Glad to have it back?" Karina shot her a look, but there was a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Let's just say I feel more like myself," she replied, her voice tinged with relief. With weapons in hand, they exited the Shadow Realm, stepping back into the smoky interior of the outer bar. The crowd had thinned, but Eli's keen eyes quickly caught sight of Rose seated at a nearby table, surrounded by a group of men, each one dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. Their faces were hard, eyes fixed on Rose as she spoke, her voice low and commanding. Rose looked up as Eli and Karina passed, her gaze lingering for a moment. She offered them a sly smile, raising her glass in a silent toast, as if to acknowledge their presence without a word. Eli returned a nod, her expression neutral as she guided Karina toward the exit. The night air was a welcome change as they stepped out of the bar, the cool breeze brushing away the thick, cloying atmosphere of the Shadow Realm. They walked in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the city a quiet hum in the distance. As they headed back to the workshop, Eli cast a glance at Karina, who was still gripping the hilt of her katana, her gaze distant. "You all right?" she asked, breaking the silence. Karina nodded, though her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. "Yeah, just processing. Eli didn't push further, respecting Karina's need for silence. Whatever had passed between her and the trader had clearly shaken something loose, but Eli knew Karina would speak up when she was ready. For now they had enough to report to Gunnar, and the answers would come in time. Back at the workshop, they would regroup, analyze the intel, and decide on their next move. But as they walked through the night, each step taking them further from the shadow realm, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that their path was winding into something darker, something that would require all of their strength, and perhaps even more than that, to face. The workshop was quiet, the low hum of machinery the only sound as Eli and Karina stepped inside. Gunnar stood by the central table, a map spread before him and his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as they entered, his intense blue gaze shifting between them, reading their expressions in an instant. "What did you find?" he asked, his tone direct and expectant. Eli glanced at Karina, then stepped forward. "We tracked down the trader who dealt in those eggs. He wasn't exactly forthcoming, but he admitted to handling them," she began. "Apparently they were sold to someone with deep pockets. He was cagey about who, but he knows more than he let on." Gunnar's eyes narrowed. "Did you get anything else? Any leads on the buyer?" Karina shook her head. "He wouldn't give a name, but there was something strange about him." She hesitated, the memory of the trader's knowing gaze flickering through her mind. "I think he recognized me. I had a flashback, a memory from when I was a kid. I don't know what it means, but it felt like he knew exactly who I was." Gunnar's expression darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "We'll have to look into that," he said, his tone thoughtful. "If he recognized you, he may know more about your past than you do." Karina nodded, her gaze steady. "There's one more thing. On the way out, we saw Rose. She was with a group of men, and she looked comfortable, confident, like she was in charge." Gunnar's eyes sharpened, his posture straightening. "Rose? At the Shadow Realm bar?" "Yeah," Eli confirmed. "She even gave us a little toast on our way out. I don't know who those men were, but they weren't your average bar crowd. She's clearly up to something, and with that bracelet on, she should be on a pretty tight leash." But it didn't look like it was holding her back much. Gunnar exhaled, his expression unreadable. "Rose has always been a wild card. We need to keep an eye on her, especially if she's gathering people around her. She could be planning something, and the last thing we need is another rogue element in the mix." He looked back at the map, then at Eli and Karina, a sense of resolve settling over him. "We're dealing with bigger forces than we realized. Between those eggs and whatever Rose is up to, this is about more than just trafficking. There's something connecting all these pieces, and we need to figure out what it is before it blows up in our faces." Eli nodded. "Agreed. And with Rose, we'll need to watch our backs. She might not have her full powers, but she's clever enough to be dangerous without them." Karina stepped closer to the table, her fingers brushing over the map. "So what's the next move?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension simmering beneath the surface. Gunnar looked between them, his gaze resolute. "We dig deeper. I'll reach out to our contacts and see if anyone else knows about these eggs and their connection to the sealed realms. As for Rose, we'll have someone shadow her. If she's planning something, we'll find out soon enough." He turned back to Eli and Karina, his expression softening slightly. "Good work. Get some rest while you can. Things are only going to get more complicated from here." They nodded, the weight of the mission settling heavily on their shoulders. As they headed toward the exit, Eli glanced back at Gunnar, a spark of determination in her eyes. She knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as a team. But in the back of her mind, the image of Rose and the memory of the trader lingered, reminders that their world was darker and more tangled than any of them had anticipated. Karina lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling as shadows moved across it, cast by the faint light filtering through the window. She felt a tension in her chest, a gnawing sense of unease that wouldn't let her rest. The evening's events replayed in her mind, the trader's strange words, the pull of the eggs, and the haunting feeling that she was missing something crucial. She rolled onto her side, gripping the edge of her blanket tightly. Ever since she'd escaped the dark forces that had controlled her as a child, she'd believed herself to be nothing more than human. And yet, moments like tonight made her question that belief. She clenched her fists, pushing the thought away. I'm human. Whatever abilities I have, they're just a side effect of those dark years. That's all. Unable to shake the thoughts, she threw on her jacket and made her way down the quiet hallway to Gunner's office. She knocked, and his familiar voice called her in. Gunner was at his desk, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. He looked up as she entered, a knowing glint in his eyes. Can't sleep? Karina shrugged, closing the door behind her. Too much going on in my head, she admitted, trying to keep her voice steady. I can't stop thinking about that trader. It's like he knew something about me and it's driving me crazy. Gunner leaned back in his chair, studying her. You think he recognized you? She nodded, sitting down across from him. It felt like it. But I don't know why. I'm just me. She hesitated, her fingers twisting together. Do you think he knows something about my past? Gunner crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. It's possible, he said carefully. Karina, I know you believe you're human, but there are things, powers, that sometimes surface, things that you can't explain. There are spells that can hide memories or abilities, especially if they were put there to protect you. Karina felt a jolt of panic but quickly pushed it down. You think I have a spell on me? She asked, half disbelieving. Gunner's gaze softened. I think it's worth considering. You might have had a memory ward placed on you. It would explain why some things feel out of reach, like you're brushing against memories you can't quite access. She swallowed, her mind racing. So what do I do? I need answers, Gunner. Gunner nodded, a reassuring presence as always. There's someone who can help. Aliana Vale. She knows more about memory wards and magic than anyone. If there's something hidden, she can help you find it. Karina took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of relief. She was ready to face whatever answers awaited, even if they challenged everything she believed about herself. She managed a small nod. Okay, when can we go? As soon as possible, Gunner replied. I'll make the arrangements. Iliana will know what to do. Karina stood, a mix of fear and determination swirling inside her. She didn't know what they would uncover, but she knew she was ready to face it, with Gunner's help, and on her own terms. The sun was just beginning to rise as Karina and Gunner approached the small, ivy-covered cottage at the edge of the forest. Though it looked unassuming from the outside, Karina knew better than to judge by appearances, especially when it came to Iliana Vale. The cottage, a doorway between realms, was one of many places Aliana used to connect the worlds she protected. Gunner knocked, and after a moment, the door swung open to reveal Iliana, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a river of moonlight. She greeted them with a warm smile, her violet eyes alight with recognition. It's good to see you both, she said, stepping aside to let them in. Come in, make yourselves comfortable. The inside of the cottage was a curious blend of old-world charm and arcane mystery. Shelves lined with ancient tomes and artifacts from various realms filled the room, and the air was scented with a mix of herbs and something otherworldly. Iliana gestured for them to sit, her movements graceful and deliberate. Once they were settled, she turned to Karina, her gaze piercing yet gentle. Gunner mentioned you've been experiencing some disturbances in your memories, Aliana began, her tone soft but serious. Karina nodded, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. It's more than that. I've always thought I was human. But lately, I'm starting to think there's something else. I keep feeling like I'm on the edge of remembering something important, but it's just out of reach. Iliana nodded, her expression thoughtful. It sounds as though there may be a memory ward in place, she said, glancing briefly at Gunner before focusing on Karina. These wards can be quite powerful, often used to protect individuals from harmful memories or to suppress abilities until they're ready to handle them. Karina swallowed, the weight of Eliana's words settling heavily on her. Is there a way to remove it? Or at least to know what's hidden from me? Eliana smiled gently, leaning forward. I can help you, but it won't be easy. Releasing a memory ward can be disorienting, even painful. We'll need to do it in stages to ensure you're not overwhelmed. She stood, moving toward one of the shelves and selecting a small vial filled with a shimmering, translucent liquid. This will help you relax, she said, handing it to Karina. It won't dissolve the ward entirely, but it should loosen it enough for you to access some of your memories. Karina took the vial, glancing at Gunnar. He nodded encouragingly and she swallowed the liquid, feeling a cool warmth spread through her chest. Eliana took her hands, her touch firm but comforting. Close your eyes, Karina, Eliana instructed, her voice calm and steady. I'm going to guide you into your memories. Just breathe and let them come to you. Karina took a deep breath, her eyelids fluttering shut as Eliana's words washed over her. For a moment there was nothing but darkness, and then she felt a gentle tug, as if something deep within her was stirring. Images began to flicker before her eyes. A dimly lit room, the scent of incense, a shadowy figure reaching out to her with a hand that pulsed with energy. She saw flashes of herself as a child, her small hands holding something smooth and cold, an egg, large and gleaming with a soft glow. She remembered voices murmuring around her, words in a language she didn't understand. And then she saw two faces, blurred but familiar, filled with both love and desperation. Her parents? They whispered words of comfort, their voices a balm even as she felt herself being pulled away from them. Eliana's voice broke through the memories, anchoring her back in the present. It's all right, Karina. You're safe here. Karina opened her eyes, her heart racing, her hands trembling. I was there. In Nythoria, I remember my parents and the eggs. They were trying to protect me, but they sent me away. Eliana nodded, her gaze understanding. The darkness that overtook Nythoria is still there, but those eggs you brought with you, they hold the key to freeing your realm. Your parents must have known that, and they sacrificed their own safety to give you a chance to save it one day. Karina's breath caught, her mind racing with the implications. So, all this time, those eggs have been waiting for me to use them? Eliana smiled softly. Yes. When the time is right, and you're ready, they will reveal their purpose to you. But for now, you need to recover, and let these memories settle. Gunnar reached over, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. We'll figure this out together, Karina. You're not alone in this. She nodded, a mixture of relief and determination swelling within her. She still had questions. About the trader, about Nythoria's darkness, and about the full extent of her abilities. But for the first time, she felt as though she was on the right path, a path that led not only to her past, but to her future as well. The familiar rush of wind and shimmer of light surrounded them as Eliana's portal to Earth opened, illuminating the forest with an ethereal glow. Karina glanced back, giving Eliana a nod of gratitude before stepping through the portal alongside Gunnar. They emerged on Earth, the air heavier, more grounded, as the portal faded behind them. Days passed in a blur of investigation and planning. Gunnar was relentless, his focus on finding out more about the eggs and their connection to Karina and the sealed realm. Karina, meanwhile, found herself caught between newfound memories and lingering questions. The sense of purpose that had come with each recovered memory gave her strength, but she knew there was still much she didn't understand. Then came the message from Shade. Gunnar barely hesitated, setting up another meeting with the elusive informant. This time he asked Karina to join him. They met in an abandoned warehouse, where Shade was already waiting, his back to them as they entered. The faint smell of damp concrete and rust filled the space, and shadows clung to the corners like silent witnesses. Shade turned at their approach. his gaze immediately locking onto Gunnar. Even in the dim light, Karina could see the tension in Shade's posture, a subtle wariness that bordered on fear. Gunnar didn't waste time. "What else do you know about the eggs, Shade?" Shade shifted uneasily, his attention fixed on Gunnar, his eyes darting occasionally to the door as if weighing his escape options. He opened his mouth to respond, but Karina interrupted, her voice steady but curious. "How did they end up in the Shadow Realm? Who put them there?" At the sound of her voice, Shade finally looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes widened, and a flicker of recognition flashed across his face, quickly replaced by something darker. Fear, maybe. Or regret. His reaction was so sudden, so visceral, that even Gunnar seemed momentarily taken aback. "Princess?" Shade whispered, the words slipping out like a secret he hadn't meant to share. For a moment he stood frozen, his gaze locked on Karina as though seeing a ghost. Before Gunnar or Karina could react, Shade turned on his heel, slipping into the shadows with a speed that defied logic. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and a trail of questions in his wake. Karina took a step forward, but Gunnar reached out, stopping her. "He's gone," he said, his tone firm. "We won't catch him now." She turned to him, her expression a mix of confusion and frustration. "Princess?" she echoed, the word strange and foreign on her tongue. What did he mean by that? Gunnar shook his head, his eyes narrowed in thought. "I don't know, but it's clear that he knows more about you than we realized, and I don't think we've seen the last of him." They stood in silence, the weight of Shade's words settling heavily between them. Karina's mind raced, fragments of memories and half-formed questions swirling around as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She'd thought she was starting to understand her past, but now it felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet once more. As they made their way back to the workshop, Karina couldn't shake the feeling that Shade's words had unlocked something deep within her, something she wasn't yet ready to face. But one thing was certain. Whatever secrets her past held, she wouldn't stop until she uncovered them all. Night had settled over the workshop, cloaking the rooms in darkness and silence. Karina lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing as fragments of memories and questions swirled around her. Shade's reaction haunted her, the look of fear, or was it regret, in his eyes when he had called her princess. The trader's knowing gaze, the flashes of memory that Eliana had helped her uncover, the sense that something dark and unfathomable lingered in her past. It all weighed down on her like a stone. She thought about the pack, about Gunnar and the others. They had become her family, had given her a place to belong. And yet, a dark voice in the back of her mind whispered that she didn't deserve their loyalty, that the sins of her past were too great, that she was tainted by things she could barely remember. She sat up, pressing her palms against her eyes, as if she could block out the thoughts threatening to consume her. Unable to sit still any longer, she threw on a jacket and left her room, moving silently through the hallways. She found herself outside Gunnar's door, hesitating. The door was slightly ajar, and she caught a glimpse of him sitting on the floor, eyes closed, a calm aura around him. She hadn't known Gunnar meditated. It was strangely grounding to see him like that, centered still, a stark contrast to the chaos in her own mind. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Come in, Karina." She froze, then stepped into the room, pulling the door closed behind her. Gunnar opened his eyes and rose, giving her a steady, assessing look. "Can I get you something to drink?" he asked, moving toward a cabinet where he kept a collection of spirits and teas. She shook her head, then hesitated. "Actually, tea would be nice," she replied softly, surprising herself. She hadn't come here for a drink, but the warmth and simplicity of a cup of tea sounded grounding. Gunnar nodded and poured hot water into a cup, adding a blend of herbs that she didn't recognize. He handed it to her, and they sat down, a comfortable silence settling between them as the steam rose from her cup. After a moment, he spoke. "Something's on your mind." She looked down, the weight of her thoughts pressing against her chest. "It's everything," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The trader, Shade. I don't even know who they are, but they seem to know everything about me. And it's like there are pieces of my past just out of reach, things I can't remember, things I can't make sense of." Gunnar nodded, listening without interruption, his presence steady and grounding. She continued, her gaze distant. "And then there's my past, the things I did when I was controlled by those dark forces. I've been trying to make amends, trying to tip the scales back, but it never feels like enough. I can't even seek forgiveness from the people I hurt. They're not around anymore. I don't know if they'll ever be balanced." She looked up at him, her eyes full of uncertainty and pain. "Sometimes I don't even feel worthy of being part of the pack. You all have shown me loyalty and trust, and I feel like I haven't earned it. I'm trying, Gunnar, I really am. But I don't know if it'll ever be enough." Gunnar reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder, his gaze unflinching as he met her eyes. "Karina," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I know you want to balance the scales, and that's admirable. But have you forgiven yourself?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. She hadn't expected it, hadn't thought of it in those terms. She had been so focused on atoning for her actions, on seeking some kind of external validation that she was worthy of redemption, that she hadn't considered what it meant to offer herself that same grace. She stammered, looking away. "I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. I guess I always assumed that wasn't my place, that I didn't deserve to forgive myself." Gunnar squeezed her shoulder, his expression unwavering. "You can't carry that weight forever, Karina. You've changed. You've worked hard to make things right, to help others. You're part of this pack because you've earned your place here, because we trust you. But if you keep holding on to that guilt, you're letting the past control you just as much as those dark forces did. You have to decide if you're ready to let it go." She swallowed, the truth of his words sinking in. She hadn't realized how deeply she'd been holding on to her guilt, how much it had defined her. In that moment, she understood that forgiveness wasn't just something she needed to seek from others, it was something she needed to give to herself. She looked back at him, her eyes shining with a mix of vulnerability and resolve. "How do I start?" Gunnar's expression softened, and he nodded approvingly. "By recognizing that you've done all you can. By accepting that what you're doing now is what matters. You're not defined by what you were forced to do. You're defined by the choices you make moving forward. And from where I'm standing, you've made the right ones." They sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Slowly she felt a sense of peace start to unfurl within her, tentative but real. She knew it would take time, but for the first time she felt as though forgiveness was possible, not from others, but from herself, and that, perhaps, was the first step toward healing. Karina took a slow sip of the tea, letting the warmth ground her as she processed Gunnar's question. The notion of forgiving herself was both foreign and terrifying, yet it felt like a step she had to take if she was ever to move forward. Gunnar watched her for a moment, and then he spoke, his voice quieter than usual, as if sharing a secret. "You know, there was a time I struggled with the same thing, after I lost my arm. I thought I'd never be the same. I was angry, bitter, convinced that I was less than I had been. And I blamed myself for it, for not being stronger, faster, for not preventing it." Karina looked at him, surprised. Gunnar had always seemed so unshakable, so resolute. She'd never imagined that he too had faced his own darkness. He glanced down at his cybernetic arm, flexing the fingers slightly. "The injury was bad enough, but what it did to my mind was worse. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. I shut myself off from everyone. There was this darkness that crept in, eating away at me, telling me I wasn't good enough. It was like fighting an invisible enemy every day." She nodded, understanding all too well the feeling of being consumed by shadows. That's when I started meditating, Gunnar continued, a faint smile crossing his lips. It didn't come easy. Hell, I'm not a man who sits still well. But I had to find a way to fight off that darkness, to look inward and face the parts of myself I'd been avoiding. I had to make peace with my scars, inside and out. Karina absorbed his words, marveling at the quiet strength they revealed. She had always seen Gunnar as the steadfast leader, a rock in the midst of chaos. To hear that he too had battled his own demons made her feel less alone, as if their struggles were threads woven from the same cloth. Gunnar met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. Meditation helped me see things more clearly. It allowed me to recognize the parts of myself I needed to forgive, the wounds I needed to heal. It's not a cure, and it doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you space to breathe, to think, and to start letting go. He leaned forward, his tone earnest. I can show you what I did. I can teach you the steps I took. But everyone's path is different. You'll have to find what works for you, and that's something only you can discover. Karina nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. I'd like that, she said quietly. I don't know if it'll work, but I'm willing to try. They spent the next hour going through the basics. Gunnar showed her how to find a comfortable position, how to breathe deeply, how to focus on a single point of calm within herself. He explained the process of acknowledging her thoughts without letting them consume her, of allowing the darkness to exist without letting it define her. She closed her eyes, following his guidance as she sought that quiet center. The darkness was still there, lurking at the edges, but as she breathed and focused, it seemed less overwhelming, more like a shadow than an all-consuming void. There was still the weight of the past, of the unknown, and of the lingering effects of the memory ward that bound her. But for a few precious moments, she felt the beginnings of peace. After a time, she opened her eyes to find Gunnar watching her, a look of quiet approval on his face. How do you feel? He asked. Karina took a deep breath, considering the question. Better, she admitted. It's like the shadows are still there, but they're quieter. They don't feel as powerful. He nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. They'll never go away completely, but the more you face them, the less control they have over you. And if you keep at it, you'll start to find that your strength comes not from escaping them, but from accepting them as part of you. She felt the truth of his words resonate within her, a sense of calm settling over her like a warm blanket. The memory ward was still there. She could feel it like a barrier pressing down on her mind, but it seemed weaker now, as if the practice had chipped away at its edges. Gunnar gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You're stronger than you think, Karina. Keep fighting and you'll find your way through, and you're not alone. The pack. Echo Division. We're with you. Karina nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the darkness of her past still loomed large, but she knew now that she wasn't walking it alone. And with Gunnar's guidance, she had a chance to find her way to the light. Karina moved through the gym, each step measured, her grip tightening around the hilt of her katana. She hadn't slept much, but the restless night had done little to drain her energy. The moment she stepped onto the training mat, her focus sharpened, and all the swirling thoughts faded into the background. She started with slow, deliberate swings, feeling the weight of the blade in her hands, grounding herself in its familiar heft. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, she began a series of swift strikes, her blade cutting through the air with precision and purpose. She moved like a storm, every muscle in her body engaged, every strike a release of the tension coiled inside her. The more she pushed, the faster she moved, until she was a blur of motion. Her mind latched onto the rhythm of the workout, letting it drown out the questions and doubts that had plagued her through the night. With each swing, she imagined slicing through the shadows of her past, the trader's knowing gaze, Shade's whispered princess, all of it fading with each strike. As she spun into a particularly forceful swing, Her katana crashed into a training dummy, sending it toppling to the ground. She barely registered the damage, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts as she reset the dummy, only to strike it again, harder. From the doorway, Darren leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. He watched her with a mix of awe and amusement, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he called out, his tone dripping with his usual sarcasm. "I'm pretty sure that dummy owes you money or something. Otherwise, that was just cruel." Karina paused, glancing over at him with narrowed eyes, but a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Need something, Darren?" she asked, her tone almost challenging. Darren pushed himself off the wall and strolled over, pretending to inspect the demolished dummy. "Not really. Just came in for my usual morning workout, but, He gestured to the carnage. "Looks like I'd better steer clear of your warpath." She rolled her eyes, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I'm just clearing my head," she muttered, setting her stance again and giving the dummy another hard swing. Darren watched her, arms folded, as she unleashed a series of brutal strikes. "Yeah, I can see that. But you know, they make therapists for this sort of thing. Or meditation. Or, I don't know, punching bags." She shot him a look, and he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying," he continued, grinning. "Whatever this dummy did to you, it's paying for it in full." Karina huffed, but there was a glimmer of amusement in her eyes now. "You're welcome to join me," she offered, twirling the katana with a challenging gleam. Darren held up a hand. "Oh, I think I'll pass. I enjoy my limbs attached, thanks." He eyed her katana with an exaggerated look of trepidation. "Besides, I don't have a death wish. That's your department, apparently." Karina chuckled despite herself, the tension in her shoulders easing a bit. Darren had a way of cutting through the heaviness, his light-hearted sarcasm a welcome relief from the intensity. She took a deep breath, letting the air settle in her lungs, and then set the katana aside, grabbing a towel to wipe her face. "Feeling better?" Darren asked, a genuine note of curiosity in his voice. "A little," she admitted, slinging the towel over her shoulder. "It's just, there's a lot on my mind. Shade, the trader. Everything feels tangled, and it's frustrating." Darren nodded, his smirk softening into something more sincere. "Yeah, I get that. But hey, whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You always do. Just maybe try not to take it out on the poor training dummies, all right? They've got families too, you know." She laughed, shaking her head. "Noted. I'll try to go easier on them next time." "Good," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. "Because I don't think there are enough dummies in the world to survive another round with you." They walked out of the gym together, Karina feeling lighter for the first time since her sleepless night. Darren's humour had broken through the intensity, reminding her that, even amidst all the uncertainty, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. Karina made her way down the hallway, her footsteps measured and quiet. She knew Darren was following her. His footsteps, though softened, were impossible to miss. She rolled her eyes, smirking to herself. For all his talents, stealth was not one of Darren's strong suits. When she reached the garage, she turned to him, arms crossed. "You're not exactly a ghost, you know," she remarked. "If you're going to follow me, you might as well drive." Darren grinned, not the least bit embarrassed. "Gladly. Besides, I make a great chauffeur," he said, sliding into the driver's seat as she climbed in beside him. They drove in silence, the tension in the air thickening as they neared the bar. Karina's thoughts were on the trader and the questions she'd come to get answered. The Shadow Realm bar was a place of rules, a rare truce among its patrons, but tonight she felt the weight of her past bearing down on her with renewed intensity. When they arrived, they passed through the battered front doors into the dive bar. The dim lighting and worn-out furniture seemed to repel any notion of comfort. The front area was teeming with humans, all seemingly oblivious to the deeper, darker secrets hidden beyond the back door. Karina walked through without sparing a glance at the mundane crowd, moving purposefully toward the door at the back. Darren followed her, taking in the dingy surroundings with a grimace. "Lovely place you've chosen for a night out," he muttered, earning a brief, amused glance from her. At the back door, they approached a towering, beastly bouncer who stood guard. Karina knew the drill. She handed over her katana without hesitation this time, the blade gleaming under the dim light. The bouncer's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by her quick compliance, before narrowing as he met her gaze. "Truce," he said, his deep voice reverberating in the small space, a reminder of the unbreakable rules within the Shadow Realm bar. Karina gave a curt nod, acknowledging the terms. The truce kept order, preventing any violence or supernatural powers from being used within the realm, no matter how high tensions ran. With a steadying breath, she stepped through the door, the familiar shimmer of magic washing over her as she crossed into the Shadow Realm. Cut to Darren. Outside, Darren watched her disappear through the door. He glanced around, noticing the curious glances from the patrons at the bar, then decided to follow her in. But as he reached for the door handle, he found himself back outside, in the alley behind the bar. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Figures," he muttered. He tried the door again, only to find himself in the same spot. Before he could turn around, two figures approached from the shadows, human in appearance but exuding an eerie, unsettling presence. They were hunched together, clutching something between them, a small vial that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. One of them glanced up, eyes narrowing as he took in Darren's presence. "What's an Earthborn doing back here?" he sneered. Darren raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Sightseeing. You know, the alley tour. Heard it's the best in town." The other man, stocky and brimming with tension, scowled. "Think you're funny?" "Oh, I'm hilarious," Darren replied, smirking. "You should stick around for the whole set." The first man moved suddenly, throwing a punch that caught Darren on the jaw. He staggered back, but before he could react, a massive figure appeared beside him, casting a shadow over the alley. The newcomer, standing over 6 feet tall and built like a tank, grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him off the ground with ease. "We're outside the truce," the thug protested, his voice tinged with fear. "Doesn't apply here." The giant raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening. "Wrong," he growled, and with a flick of his wrist, he hurled the man over a stone fence, sending him crashing out of sight. The remaining thug dropped his vial, glancing nervously between Darren and the giant before bolting back down the alley. Darren brushed himself off, rubbing his sore jaw and giving the massive stranger a lopsided grin. "Thanks for the save, big guy. You always this friendly?" The giant merely shook his head, saying nothing as he turned and vanished back into the shadows. Darren bent down, picking up the vial, and inspected it before slipping it into his pocket. "Well, this has been enlightening," he muttered, making his way back inside. When he entered the bar, he took a seat at the counter, ordering a drink and settling in to wait for Karina. Darren leaned back on his stool at the bar, his gaze flickering around the room as he sipped his drink. The place looked like any rundown dive bar from the outside, but inside it was something else entirely. The humans, or those who appeared human, sat in quiet clusters, their eyes darting to the shadows as if something unseen might emerge at any moment. There was a strange energy in the air, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to ripple through the patrons. He noticed one man sitting a few stools away, nursing a glass of something thick and dark that didn't look like any liquor Darren had ever seen. His eyes glinted an unnatural shade of yellow under the dim lights, and his fingers tapped rhythmically on the bar, almost like a signal. Across the room, a woman with silver hair and an ageless face spoke to a man with a hawkish expression. Their conversation was hushed, but their gestures sharp and furtive. Every now and then her fingers seemed to shimmer, her nails elongating briefly before retracting. A low hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional sound of glass clinking. Darren could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, and he had the distinct impression that everyone here was more than they seemed. He took another sip, Pretending not to notice the way the bartender, a thin man with an elongated face and a permanent scowl, kept glancing his way, as though trying to figure out what he was doing there. Karina's perspective in the shadow realm. Karina stepped through the doorway and into the shadow realm, feeling the familiar rush of magic wash over her as she crossed the threshold. The bar looked different here, darker, quieter, with an air of mystery that seemed to hang heavy in the shadows. The patrons here were no longer hiding their true forms. She spotted creatures with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed like embers, their attention turning toward her as she moved through the room. Karina had found her mark. She approached the trader, her movements controlled but simmering with intent. The trader, a wiry man with a thin mustache and a gaze that seemed to pierce through her, watched her approach with a faint, knowing smile. "What's your name?" she demanded, her voice low but firm. The trader tilted his head, his eyes flicking over her with an air of mild amusement. "Names are but shadows, fleeting and elusive," he replied, his voice smooth and maddeningly calm. Karina's jaw clenched. "I don't have time for riddles. I need answers." The trader spread his hands in a gesture of feigned innocence. "Ah, but answers are like grains of sand, slipping through the fingers." Her patience snapped, and she took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not asking again." The murmur of conversations around them faded as heads began to turn, eyes watching the unfolding confrontation. The trader seemed to sense the growing attention, and his tone shifted as though to placate her. "Very well," he said, leaning in. "For now, you may call me Tarsin." "Tarsin," she repeated, skepticism lacing her words. "Is that even your real name?" He merely smiled, his expression inscrutable. "Names are only real if you believe in them." The crowd around them grew quieter, the silence thickening as Karina's frustration mounted. She glanced around, realizing she was drawing attention, and tried to pull back. But Tarsin continued, his words twisting around the truth, leading her nowhere. "I've had enough," she muttered, reaching out and gripping the front of his shirt. She pulled him closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're going to start giving me real answers, or—" "Truce," rumbled a deep voice beside her. The single word cut through the tension like a blade, its weight almost physical. Karina turned to see the massive bouncer standing over her, his face contorted as though speaking had caused him great pain. She released Tarsin, taking a step back, her eyes never leaving the trader's face. The distraction had given him just enough room to slip out of her grasp. In a heartbeat, he was gone, melting into the shadows of the bar. Karina cursed under her breath, scanning the room for any sign of him, but he had disappeared as though he'd never been there. She turned to the bouncer, frustration flaring in her eyes. But before she could speak, another voice called out, "Princess Calithra, is it really you?" She spun around, her heart racing, and found herself face to face with Shade. His expression was one of disbelief, tinged with something else, fear, or perhaps regret. He reached out, pressing a small rolled-up parchment into her hand. "Take this," he whispered. "It may not be the answers you want, but it's a start." Before she could respond, Shade slipped back into the crowd, leaving her alone with the parchment in her hand. She barely had time to process what had happened before a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder. "Must go," the bouncer rumbled, his voice strained as though speaking was a painful effort. His fingers were like iron, guiding her toward the door with a finality that brooked no argument. Karina resisted for a moment, but there was no point. The rules of the truce were clear, and she had already pushed the boundaries. She shot one last glance around the bar, her gaze lingering on the faces of the patrons who had watched the exchange. But they quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. As she stepped through the doorway and back into the mundane world, she felt the weight of Shade's message in her hand and the familiar coil of frustration in her chest. The night had given her more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. The shadows of her past were closing in, and she was no longer sure she could escape them. The cold night air wrapped around Karina as she stepped out of the bar, her face an unreadable mask. She caught Darren's eye as he leaned against the car, raising an eyebrow at her with a lopsided grin. Wordlessly, she nodded, and he fell in beside her. They slid into the car, the silence stretching between them as the engine rumbled to life. He glanced over as she held up a small, rolled parchment, her fingers tracing the edges as though it held all the answers and none at once. She stared at it, eyes narrowed in contemplation, before dropping it into her lap with a sigh. "So," Darren began, leaning back as he watched her with a curious tilt of his head, "you find out if he's a long-lost cousin or just a guy with bad fashion sense?" Karina shot him a sidelong glance, managing a faint smirk. "Something like that. He gave me his name, Tarsin, apparently, and then Shade showed up." She hesitated, her fingers brushing over the parchment as she continued. "Called me princess like he knew who I was. Before I could even blink, he handed me this." Darren's eyes flicked to the parchment in her lap, his usual smirk softening. "Sounds like quite the night out. So what's the hold-up? Don't you want to see what it says?" Karina frowned, her grip tightening on the rolled paper. "I'm not sure. Part of me feels like, once I read this, there's no going back. It's not just about me anymore." Darren chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Karina. You've been carrying the weight of whatever this is long before tonight. This little scroll's just another piece of the puzzle." She looked away, chewing on her lip as she considered his words. I don't know if I'm ready. What if it's something I can't handle?" Darren's expression softened, his usual sarcasm replaced by a rare hint of seriousness. "Look, you've handled worse things than a piece of paper. You've been dealing with the unknown all your life, haven't you?" He paused, the grin returning as he nudged her shoulder. "Besides, you're not exactly the type to shy away from a fight, so why start now?" Karina exhaled slowly, her gaze fixed on the parchment. She could feel its weight, as though the words within held something much larger than herself. "I guess I'm just worried that whatever's in here will change everything." Darren shrugged, giving her a reassuring smile. "Maybe it will, but maybe that's what you need. Sometimes the things we're afraid of are just the beginning of something we didn't know we were waiting for." He reached over, patting her hand. "You've got this, princess." She rolled her eyes, but the tension in her shoulders eased a little. All right. Maybe I'll open it. But if it says I'm secretly the queen of the universe or something, I'm going to blame you for jinxing it." Darren grinned, leaning back as he settled into his seat. "Hey, I'm just here for the ride. But if you do end up queen of the universe, I expect at least a castle." They shared a rare laugh, the tension between them breaking as the parchment sat patiently in her lap, waiting for her to decide. Karina took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the edge of the paper as she made her choice. The night stretched ahead, and whatever lay within those words would be the first step on a path she couldn't yet see. But at least she realized she wasn't walking it alone. The drive back to the workshop was quiet, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on them. Karina kept her gaze fixed out the window, clutching the parchment as though it might disappear if she let go. Beside her, Darren drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his usual chatter replaced by thoughtful silence. When they pulled up to the workshop, Darren glanced over at her. "You know," he started, fishing in his pocket, "I actually found something myself tonight." He held up a small glass vial, its contents glimmering faintly even in the low light. Karina raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "No clue," Darren replied, handing it over. "Picked it up after a little, disagreement outside the bar. I'd bet it's something shady. One of those guys back there dropped it like it was contraband." She turned the vial over in her hand, noting the iridescent liquid inside. It seemed to swirl of its own accord, almost as if it were alive. "This doesn't look like any potion I've seen before," she murmured, frowning. "Yeah, figured it was worth showing Gunnar," Darren said, stepping out of the car and motioning for her to follow. "If there's something weird going on at that bar, he'll want to know." They entered the workshop. the quiet hum of machinery and the familiar scent of oil and metal welcoming them back. They found Gunnar in his office, poring over a set of blueprints, his intense gaze shifting when they walked in. He looked up, his expression softening slightly as he took in the sight of them. "You're back," he remarked, folding the blueprints and setting them aside. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Karina exchanged a quick glance with Darren before handing over the vial. "Not exactly. We've got more questions than answers." She took a breath, her grip tightening on the vial before she released it into Gunnar's hand. "We found this." Darren picked it up outside. It was in the middle of some kind of shady transaction. Gunnar examined the vial, holding it up to the light. The liquid inside shimmered, its colour shifting from a deep violet to an almost green hue. "This isn't just any ordinary substance," he muttered. "This looks like something out of the shadow realm. Could be magical, or at the very least, supernatural." Karina nodded, feeling the weight of the parchment still in her other hand. "And then there's this," she added, holding it up but not quite ready to unroll it. "Shade gave it to me. It might have answers about my past, but I haven't read it yet." Gunnar met her gaze, his eyes steady and reassuring. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. If there's something in there that can help us understand what's going on, it's worth knowing, but only when you're ready." Darren, leaning casually against the doorframe, nodded. "Hey, maybe the vial and that parchment are connected. Could be we're dealing with something bigger than just Nothoria's secrets." Karina took a steadying breath, feeling the truth of his words. There were pieces here, scattered fragments of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. But with Gunnar and Darren by her side, she felt a little less alone in the maze of her own past. "All right," she said, determination settling into her bones. "Let's figure this out. Whatever's coming, I want to be ready." Gunnar took the vial from Karina, his gaze thoughtful as he turned it over in his hand. After a moment, he passed it back to Darren. "Take this to Eli. See if she can figure out what it is. And try to be nice, or she might just throw it back at you." Darren smirked, pocketing the vial. "You got it, boss. I'll go see if Keebler has any elf magic that can crack this open." He gave Karina a quick nod and slipped out of the room, his footsteps fading down the hall. Once they were alone, Gunnar turned to her, his expression soft but intent. "You know," he began, "if you're going to open that scroll, you don't have to do it alone. I can stay with you if you want, or I can give you space. It's your call." Karina looked down at the parchment in her hand, the weight of it almost unbearable. "I don't know, Gunnar. Part of me wants to tear it open right here and now, but I'm also afraid of what I'll find." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get it. That scroll could hold anything. And there's no telling what kind of impact it might have on you, or on the pack." She swallowed, her gaze flicking up to meet his. "Where should I go?" "The courtyard," he suggested, leaning back in his chair. "It's the heart of our connection as a pack. That place has more mystical meaning and power than anywhere else in this compound. If there's something dark or dangerous hidden in that scroll, the courtyard will offer the most protection." She let his words sink in, imagining the courtyard's ancient stones beneath her feet. It was where they had forged their bonds with their spirit animals, where they came to renew their strength, and where they sought guidance in times of uncertainty. It was a place of unity, resilience, and power. "I've always felt safe there," she admitted, almost to herself. "Exactly," Gunnar replied, a reassuring presence beside her. "The pack has a connection there, something that can't be broken. Whatever that scroll holds, good or bad, you'll have that strength backing you up." He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her with his steady gaze. "So, what do you say?" "I'm with you, if you want me there." Karina took a deep breath, clutching the scroll a little tighter. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "Let's go to the courtyard." Gunnar gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze, a hint of a smile breaking through his stoic expression. "All right. Take your time. Gather your thoughts. I'll be right there with you." She felt a flicker of gratitude, the fear in her chest easing slightly. She wasn't alone, not really, and with Gunnar at her side, she felt braver than she had in a long time. Together, they stepped out of the room and headed toward the courtyard, the center of the pack's strength, and perhaps the beginning of her journey to reclaim her true self. Eli stood in her workshop, surrounded by a whirlwind of arcane symbols and flickering holograms. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and the faint hum of enchanted tech. She had been working on this particular experiment for days, meticulously blending ancient elven spells with the latest in technomancy. She was on the brink of completion. One more step, and she would finally see the fruits of her labor. Just as she prepared to make the final adjustment, the door swung open, and Darren strolled in, his usual smirk firmly in place. "Hey, Keebler," he called out, tossing the vial in the air before catching it again. "Got something for you." The sudden noise broke her concentration, and Eli's eyes snapped up, a spark of irritation flashing in their violet depths. Before she could react, one of the glowing symbols in front of her flickered and fizzled out. The entire setup collapsed in a shower of sparks and smoke. Eli's face twisted in fury as she rounded on him, fists clenched at her sides. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" she hissed, her voice cold and cutting. "That experiment took 3 days. 3 days of non-stop work, and now it's ruined." Darren held up his hands, the vial still clutched in one. "Whoa, hold on there, Keebler. Didn't mean to break anything. I was just bringing you a gift." He flashed her his best grin, but it did nothing to soften the murderous glare she leveled at him. "A gift?" she echoed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Unless it's a potion that lets me travel back in time to fix this mess, I'm not interested." She crossed her arms, her silver hair still sparking with residual magic. "You better have a very good reason for interrupting me." He cleared his throat, taking a cautious step back. "Okay, yeah, so maybe it's not a time travel potion, but it's still pretty interesting." He held the vial up, letting the light catch the iridescent liquid inside. "Found this at the bar. Looks like contraband, and Gunnar thought you might know what it is." She took the vial from him, her fingers brushing over the glass as she examined it with a critical eye. Her irritation seemed to cool slightly as she focused on the substance, curiosity peeking through her anger. She tilted the vial, watching the liquid swirl inside. Interesting," she murmured, her initial fury fading as she slipped back into her analytical mindset. Darren let out a silent sigh of relief, watching her as she moved to one of her workstations and placed the vial under a small, rune-etched device. It emitted a soft glow, scanning the liquid and displaying a string of information on a nearby screen. "Well, what is it?" he asked, edging closer. Eli tapped a few buttons, her gaze focused on the readings. "It's a drug," she said finally, frowning. "But it's not just any drug. This particular concoction is designed specifically for supernaturals. It amplifies their abilities, but it comes with a cost. It's highly addictive. And from what I'm seeing here, it has a high chance of causing severe side effects." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Severe side effects? Like what?" "Best case scenario? It gives them a temporary boost, maybe a heightened sense of power or an adrenaline rush. But for most, it's more dangerous than that. Prolonged use could lead to permanent damage, or death," she replied, her tone grave. "And for humans, even a small dose would be lethal. The chemical composition would shut down their systems almost immediately." Darren frowned, processing the implications. "So, someone's out there selling this stuff to supernaturals? Seems risky even for them." Eli nodded, her expression darkening. "It is. Whoever's dealing this has to know the risks. They're either incredibly reckless, or they're trying to stir up trouble among the supernatural community." She set the vial down, crossing her arms as she considered the possibilities. This could explain some of the strange behavior we've seen lately. If this drug is circulating, it could destabilize things very quickly. "Gunnar figured you'd know what to do with it," Darren said, glancing at the vial. "Think you can reverse engineer it?" Maybe figure out a way to track down the source. Eli's eyes narrowed as she looked at the vial again. It won't be easy, but I can try. If I can isolate the base ingredients, it might give us a clue as to who's making it and where it's coming from. She glanced at Darren, a hint of a smirk returning to her face. And next time, maybe knock before barging in. You're lucky I didn't have anything more volatile going on. He held up his hands, grinning. Hey, I'm just here to make your life more exciting. Eli rolled her eyes but couldn't entirely hide her amusement. Exciting, sure. Now, get out of here and let me work. I'll let you know what I find. Darren gave her a mock salute and retreated, leaving her to her work. As he closed the door behind him, Eli turned back to the vial, her mind already racing with possibilities. Whoever was behind this drug had dangerous intentions, and she wasn't about to let it slide. Karina knelt in the center of the courtyard, the night air cool against her skin as she held the scroll in her hands. The ancient stones beneath her seemed to hum with quiet power, grounding her as she gazed at the scroll's seal. It was an intricate design, a symbol she didn't quite recognize but felt drawn to, as though it were etched somewhere deep within her memory. She traced the seal with her finger, noticing the delicate, almost organic lines that seemed to twist and curl around themselves. Despite its age, the seal was intact, untouched by time or tampering. Whatever secrets it held had been guarded fiercely. Gunnar stood a few paces away, silent and steady, his presence reassuring. He offered her a slight nod and she took a breath, steeling herself as she made the decision to open it. The moment she pressed her thumb to the seal, it began to glow, a faint silver light that grew brighter, casting shifting shadows across the courtyard. She could feel the warmth of it against her skin as the seal melted away, the edges dissolving like wax under a flame. Within seconds, the seal was gone, leaving the scroll bare and ready to be unfurled. Karina hesitated, feeling the weight of whatever lay inside pressing on her, but there was no turning back now. She unrolled the parchment, and as she did, a soft golden light washed over the surface. Words began to form, as if they were being written by an invisible hand, their letters shimmering into existence one by one. She could feel the scroll's ancient magic at work, powerful and intentional. Her breath caught as she read, the words seeming to pulse with a life of their own, resonating in a way that felt almost familiar. Caelithra, our beloved daughter, when the darkness falls and the light fades, remember the strength within. Seek the shadows not to hide, but to reclaim what is ours. 3 gifts we have left you, each a piece of what was. Guard them well, for they will guide you home. Nythoria endures as long as you do. You are our hope, our last flame in the encroaching night. And the light from the words seemed to linger in the air, a soft glow that wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Her hands trembled slightly, the full weight of the message settling into her bones. She read the words again, each line sparking fragments of memory she couldn't quite grasp, but felt deeply. Her fingers traced the symbol at the bottom of the scroll, a familiar mark that resonated within her chest, as if it were a part of her. She could almost hear her parents' voices, soft and reassuring, echoing through the courtyard as though they were there beside her. Caelithra. Gunnar's voice broke the silence, grounding her back in the present. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. That name, it belongs to you, doesn't it? She nodded, barely able to speak. I think it does. This scroll, it feels like a piece of my past. A message left for me, meant to be found now. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of wonder and fear. It's as if they knew I'd be here, that I'd need to hear this. Gunnar offered a faint, reassuring smile. They did. And now you do. Whatever happens next, you've got this. You're not alone, Caelithra. She managed a small smile, the name settling into her like a missing piece. She wasn't just Karina anymore. She was Calithra, last princess of Nithoria. And while she had no idea what the journey ahead held, she felt for the first time like she was beginning to understand where she came from and who she truly was. As the words on the scroll faded, the courtyard grew still once more, but she could feel a spark within her, a glimmer of purpose that had been long dormant. The pieces of her past were slowly falling into place, and while the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she was ready to face it. The quiet of the courtyard was shattered by a flicker of movement in the shadows. Before either of them could react, a figure stepped out, his presence rippling through the stillness. Gunnar moved with a speed that belied his size, his arm snapping forward as the silver dagger extended in a blur, pinning Shade to the ground before he could make another move. Shade gasped, his body pinned beneath the cold steel, his eyes wide with fear as he stared up at Gunnar. "Wait!" he cried, his voice frantic. "Please, I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I must confess. To my princess." Karina's breath caught, and she moved forward, her hand reaching out to rest on Gunnar's arm. "Gunnar, let him speak," she urged softly, her fingers tightening on his wrist. Gunnar's eyes narrowed, but he retracted the blade, stepping back reluctantly as Shade struggled to his knees. Shade's face was pale and his shoulders slumped as he looked up at her, a depth of sorrow in his eyes that seemed almost tangible. "I am so sorry," he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have carried this guilt for so long, but you must hear the truth, Princess Calithra." The courtyard grew quiet again, and the tension in the air felt like a live wire. Shade took a deep, shuddering breath, steadying himself as he began. "Your parents, King Oren and Queen Lysandra, they entrusted me with your life," he said, his voice cracking. "I was the captain of the House Guard, sworn to protect you. When the darkness began consuming Nithoria, they knew you had to be taken to safety. I was to watch over you, to keep you from harm." He swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "But I failed." Karina watched him, her heart pounding in her chest as fragments of her past flickered at the edges of her memory. "What happened?" she whispered. Shade's face contorted with shame. "The traitor betrayed us all," he said, bitterness dripping from every word. "He was supposed to help us get you to safety, but instead, he attacked, rendered me unconscious. By the time I awoke, you were gone. He'd taken you and there was nothing I could do." He closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. "I searched for you everywhere, but he disappeared, and I had no way to find you. I couldn't protect you. I could never get close enough to the trader to learn where you were." He looked up at her, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I failed you, Princess. I have lived with that failure every day since." Karina knelt beside him, her own emotions churning as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were under my parents' orders," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And you did everything you could. You didn't fail. We were all deceived." Shade looked at her in surprise, his expression crumbling. She reached out, gently lifting him to his feet, and together they began to walk the perimeter of the courtyard. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. They moved in quiet reverence, the weight of their shared history binding them together. As they walked, Shade spoke, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and relief. "I have watched over you from afar all these years, but I was never able to reveal myself. The trader remained within the shadow realm, beyond my reach. I never dreamed I would see you again." Karina looked at him, her own heart heavy with the knowledge that had been revealed. "We're here now," she said quietly, "and there's still time to set things right. I need to know the truth, all of it." Shade nodded, his face etched with determination. "I will tell you everything I know. Your parents' legacy, the truth of Nithoria, the path they intended for you. I will not fail you again, Princess." They walked back toward the center of the courtyard, where Gunnar and the pack were gathered, having rushed in when the alarms sounded. Karina met Gunnar's gaze and nodded, signaling that everything was under control. As Shade stepped back, Karina looked at the gathered faces, the people who had become her family, and felt a surge of purpose rising within her. Meanwhile, Gunnar's confrontation with Eli. As Karina and Shade moved away, Gunnar's eyes narrowed on Eli. He took a step closer, his presence commanding as he folded his arms over his chest. How the hell did he get in here undetected? Eli, still processing the situation, raised an eyebrow. The courtyard's wards are strong, Gunnar. I can't explain how he slipped through without us knowing. Gunnar's jaw tightened. Figure it out. If Shade can walk in here without so much as a whisper of warning, who knows what else might be able to get past us? I need answers. Eli nodded, her expression growing serious. I'll look into it right away. But if Shade's here, it means he's gone to a lot of trouble to stay hidden until now. That kind of magic doesn't just come out of nowhere. Gunnar's gaze was steely. Then you'd better find out where it came from. I'm not letting anything else slip past us. Not now. As Eli hurried to check the wards and dig deeper into Shade's unexpected entrance, Gunnar watched Karina with Shade in the distance, a storm brewing in his eyes. This was more than he had bargained for, and he wasn't about to let anything catch him or the pack off guard again. Gunnar stood in the dim light of the command room, his hand resting on the talisman Clara had given him. The faint hum of magic buzzed through his fingers as he received the message from Lysandra's realm. Her request was clear. She needed him to come. Urgently. Without hesitation, Gunnar's fingers tightened around the talisman, sending his reply. On my way. He pushed the talisman into his jacket and turned to where Darren leaned against the doorframe, looking casual as ever, but with a glint of curiosity in his eyes. Darren, you ready for your first off-world mission? Gunnar's voice was calm but carried the weight of what was to come. Darren straightened, a smirk tugging at his lips. Off-world, huh? Sounds like a walk in the park. Do I get a cool space helmet? Gunnar rolled his eyes but allowed a small chuckle to escape. You're about to learn that not all realms are like Earth, but I'm sure you'll find a way to make it interesting. Get your gear ready. We leave soon. As Darren pushed off the wall, Gunnar's expression grew more serious. And Darren, this isn't just another mission. Lysandra's realm is complicated. Stay sharp. Darren nodded, the weight of Gunnar's tone setting in. Got it, boss. I'll pack my sarcasm and a spare set of eyes. Gunnar left the room, moving with purpose through the hallways of the compound. His next stop was Karina's quarters, where she had been spending most of her time with Shade, learning everything she could about her identity as Kalithra, and the dark past she had yet to fully reclaim. He knocked lightly and opened the door, finding her sitting with Shade, deep in conversation. She looked up, the shadows of old memories etched into her face. Karina, Gunnar said gently, I wanted to let you know. I'm heading off-world with Darren and Alpha. Lysandra needs me. Karina stood, her face calm but serious. You're going to her realm? Gunnar nodded. She's requested my help. I'll keep you updated. Karina offered a nod of understanding, but there was a flash of something in her eyes. Perhaps concern or perhaps the weight of her own responsibilities pressing on her. Be careful, she said, her voice soft but firm. I always am, Gunnar replied, offering her a small, reassuring smile before turning to leave. Stay sharp with Shade. I have a feeling his knowledge is going to be crucial for what's ahead. His next stop was Desera, who was in the armory checking weapons when he found her. Her focus on the equipment was razor-sharp, a testament to her precision and attention to detail. Desera, Gunnar called as he entered. She looked up, nodding in greeting. I'll be off-world for a while. You're in charge until I get back. Desera raised an eyebrow but gave a curt nod. Understood. How long will you be gone? Not sure, Gunnar admitted. Depends on what we find, but I trust you to handle things here. Keep everyone in line. and stay vigilant. Desera's eyes flicked toward the weapons before she returned her gaze to him. Consider it done. Gunnar placed a hand on her shoulder. I know you'll handle it. Keep the team safe. As he left the armory, his final stop was Eli's workshop. He found her hunched over her latest project, wires and magical runes scattered across the table. She didn't look up when he entered, though she surely sensed him. Gunnar, she said, her voice muffled by the mask she wore while working. I'm assuming this isn't a social visit. Not exactly, Gunnar replied. I'm heading off-world with Darren and Alpha. Lissandra's requested my help. Eli finally lifted her head, raising an eyebrow. Off-world again? You know, one of these days you'll have to take a vacation somewhere a little less lethal. Gunnar smirked. Maybe after this. Eli set down her tools and met his gaze. What do you need from me? Gunnar's expression darkened. I want answers. Figure out how Shade bypassed our security. I want every detail when I get back. If Shade can slip in, so can others, and we can't afford any more surprises. Eli's face grew serious as well, and she gave a quick nod. I'm already working on it. By the time you're back, I'll have answers. Satisfied, Gunnar left the workshop and headed toward the courtyard, where he knew Eliana Vale would be waiting to open the portal. The night air was cool, and Alpha, his massive dire wolf companion, padded silently beside him. As Gunnar approached, Eliana was already standing by the stone circle, her presence as serene and mystical as ever. She glanced at him and gave a knowing smile. The portal is ready. Lysandra has requested your presence urgently. Gunnar nodded, his expression unreadable. Then let's not keep her waiting. Eliana raised her hand, and with a few whispered words, the air before them shimmered and warped. A swirling portal of blue and silver magic opening like a gateway between worlds. Gunnar stepped forward, Alpha following close behind, and glanced back as Darren jogged up to join them, fully geared and ready for whatever lay ahead. Ready? Gunnar asked. Darren grinned, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Always. Let's go see what's waiting for us on the other side. Without another word, the three of them stepped through the portal, leaving the courtyard and Earth behind as they ventured into Lysandra's realm.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.